Hello and welcome to The Energy Gang, a discussion show from Wood Mackenzie about the fast-changing world of energy. I'm Ed Crooks, and on this show we're going to be bringing you an update from the COP30 climate talks in Belem, Brazil. The negotiations continue, with continuing evidence of deep divisions between countries over the right responses to climate change. And there have been the usual announcements and updates on specific sectoral initiatives. There's been a lot of talk about methane, including the launch of the first global methane status report from the UN, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that later in the show. But another big topic for COP30 has been energy efficiency. COP28 in Dubai a couple of years ago agreed a pledge to double the rate of energy efficiency improvements worldwide. And one of the issues on the agenda at COP30 has been how to implement that pledge. And to discuss that issue of energy efficiency, it's a pleasure to welcome back Amy Myers Jaffe. Amy is the director of the Energy, Climate Justice and Sustainability Lab at New York University. Hi Amy, how are you?
I'm great, Ed. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Very good. It's also a pleasure to welcome from Belem, Brazil, for the first time on the show, Bob Hinkle, who is the founder and CEO of Metrus Energy. Hello, Bob. Welcome to the Energy Gang.
Yeah, no, great to be here. I'm really excited for the discussion today, and doing this from COP30 adds a lot, probably a little background noise too. So apologies in advance for that.
Yeah, not at all. No, it sounds great. It's very live, kind of good to hear from you right at the heart of the talks as they're going on right now. Got power? At Hythium, we make sure the answer is always yes. Recognised 7 times as a BNEF Tier 1 best provider and ranked top 2 globally for battery shipments for 2025. Hythium delivers safe, reliable and profitable energy solutions that keep the clean energy transition powering forward. Let green energy benefit all. Trusted worldwide, built to last. Discover more at www.hythium.com, and let's talk energy that works for good. LNG 2026 is the premier global conference and exhibition for the LNG industry, taking place in Doha, Qatar on the 2nd to the 5th of February 2026. The event will highlight how LNG can meet growing demand for energy, drive economic development, and enable a lower carbon future. It'll also explore issues including the impact of AI, changing ESG regulations, emerging low-carbon fuels including hydrogen and ammonia, and ways to cut methane emissions. To understand where the industry is heading, LNG 2026 is the place to be. Explore the exhibition floor, see the latest technologies in action, and hear from the experts. Register today at lng2026.com. Before we get into that, and I want to talk a little bit about the sort of the scene and the feel of COP30 in a moment, but before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself and about Metrus Energy. You founded the company in, I think, 2009. Can you talk a bit about what it is you do and what your goals are?
Yeah, in terms of some background on Metrus, we're a developer, financer, and an owner of larger scale energy efficiency and sustainable energy upgrade projects, typically for commercial, industrial, and manufacturing firms, but also for colleges, schools, and hospitals, really a lot of community type investment projects. We finance and implement projects under our energy as a service solution, where we fund 100% of the upfront cost of a project, own the assets, and then bill customers based on the measured performance. And back when I founded Metrus, and you're right, it was kind of right in that 2008, 2009 time period. It was at a time when the market for power purchase agreements, particularly for smaller scale solar projects, was taking off. And my objective with Metrus was really to turn that solar PPA model on its head and finance projects, but then bill based on realized energy savings rather than energy generations. And our first tagline at Metrus was even saved is earned back when we started. And that really reflected that our focus was solely on energy savings. But over time, as the markets evolved and Metrus has evolved, and frankly, as I've learned, we've really come to realize that projects are about a lot more than energy savings.
Good. So tell us about going to COP30 then. Why are you there?
Well, I mean, a variety of reasons. I mean, first off, it's a privilege to be here at COP. This is my 5th COP, and every time that I come, I learn something. And I learned something that I take away as an individual, but also really from a business perspective. I mentioned that Metrus has expanded into the delivery of cooling and heating as a service and not just energy efficiency as a service. Well, that really came from COP28, and back at that time, the Global Cooling Pledge, and Metrus joined a group that's part of the UN Cool Coalition, and all that just really helped me see around different corners, new business opportunities for Metrus. So That's really meaningful. But then I think also I'm a big believer in voting with your feet. And this is a critical time in the energy transition. And as we think about climate change and showing that the US is broader than the federal government, is part of a larger private sector and really subnational leaders that are engaged and focused on, from my perspective, the business opportunity that climate presents. That's key. And that's why I'm here.
And how does this one compare to those earlier COPs that you've been to? It certainly feels like the American business presence has been dialed down quite a bit, partly, I think, for logistical reasons. I know some people went to meetings in Sao Paulo or Rio, didn't actually come to Belem, which is not a huge city. I say, does it feel lonely being an American business representative when, as I say, a lot of other businesses have stayed away?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, breaking it into a couple different parts. There's the federal government presence, and then there's the US business presence, and then there's subnational leaders. So starting with the first is pretty simple. The federal presence at the US from the US government was one person, and that was Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. And it was great to have him here. I bet he was pretty lonely. um, but in terms of the broader business, presence here, I don't see it being as of a radical drop as maybe is being talked about. Yes, I do think it's a smaller presence. Some of that, as you pointed out, I think is the logistics here of getting to Belem. I wouldn't separate. I mean, I would think of the broader business presence within the leader summits that did take place in Sao Paulo and Rio as well. So I think when you add up the presence of US businesses from those two earlier events, along with who's here in Belem, I think you get a good group of folks. I'm here as part of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy's delegation. I've come with them for the last 5 years. Their delegation is similar size. So, a little bit of a drop, but not as much as people are saying. And then just last night, I was on a panel that was a combo of both private sector leaders and subnational leaders. And there were a lot of folks from the different city and state level, New Mexico, Tennessee, California, of course, has had a really big presence here. And I'm not just saying that because Metrus is based in San Francisco, but, California is the fourth largest economy in the world, if you want to look at it in its isolation. And there was a strong presence here. And again, it gets back to that point of the US is really, a mosaic of a lot broader groups, and many of them are here.
So, Bob, let me ask you about that because in watching the media, Exxon seems to have a presence and wanted to make that presence known. But the complaints from the Azerbaijan COP and the Dubai COP was that the oil industry was all over the place. Did you feel that in previous COPs, and did they seem not present this time? I mean, do you see a change in that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would say certainly in the last two COPs, probably even take it back one to Egypt as well. Definitely a strong oil and gas presence, and that was more palpable than Glasgow and more palpable than it is here. So I would say, that for sure is true. Probably a little less of a presence, I would say, also from larger financial institutions. That I think is a big drop off. But some of that too, and there's been some discussion on this topic, and your question's a good one. Not all COPs are created equal. I think COP28 with the global stock take that was happening then, COP26 and some of the focus on the net zero alliance, there's certain COPs that I think pull in people more. And the absence of some of those folks might or might not mean anything. And, what I've seen here is definitely a very strong private sector kind of focus on projects, where a lot of the discussions I've been having are with the people that might not be, some of the higher level CEO folks from businesses, but are the people that are getting the work done.
So let's talk about what has been happening then and what businesses have been doing. There was one thing that particularly caught my eye was this letter. I know you were one of the signatories of this letter signed by 180 American businesses sent to the president and the CEO of COP30, organized by the Business Council for Sustainable Energy you were talking about earlier and the Alliance to Save Energy. And it's talking about your commitment to that goal of doubling energy efficiency by 2030, or to be clear, to be doubling energy efficiency improvements, the rate of those by 2030. That was the goal that was first agreed by governments, COP28 in Dubai. Let's talk first of all about why you signed that letter. What is the significance of it to you?
The letter does a couple things that I really like. I mean, first, it puts a spotlight on energy efficiency, which is critical. It's critical on many fronts. It's really a strategic imperative for US businesses in terms of the climate. Energy efficiency on its own can account for over 40% of the emission reductions that are needed to hit the Paris Agreement. And I like the style of the goal because it sets the direction of travel, tells where we need to get to. It gives a time period, but it isn't prescriptive in how to get there. It gives flexibility to deploy all different types of energy efficiency solutions and upgrades. And that's exactly how we think about things at Metrus when we work with customers. It's about meeting a customer where they're at, finding the right solutions for them, because energy efficiency is a lot of different things, a lot of different technologies, and you don't want to be too prescriptive.
So, of course, the other thing that people really like about energy efficiency is that you can want to pursue it even if you don't care at all about climate. It, as you say, can have significant benefits in terms of reducing emissions, but it can also be something you want to do just in order to save money, which I guess, presumably, particularly in the present climate, when everyone's very focused on energy affordability, when many people, including the present administration, are much less focused on emissions reduction, means that it's kind of compelling as something you can continue to support and advance and make progress with, even at the moment.
Well, and especially a lot of countries have pressures on their electricity grid. So that gets to either the price for electricity, the retail price to consumers, but it also gets to just how many businesses can you add? Can you move forward? Economic development, if you're in the global south, can you move forward on other kinds of industries that need electricity to be successful? So it does really, check a lot of boxes. Bob, are you finding though, with electricity prices going up, there's less interest in HVAC for heating solutions or not? I mean, is that something that you see in your business?
I think it's across the board. You both bring up two really key points. I mean, maybe starting first with Ed's comment, I think that's spot on. What we see from customers is, yes, energy savings are nice, but if I'm being honest, very few of our projects are getting done because someone is saving on their energy bill. We're doing projects because we're replacing boilers and HVAC systems that are 30, 40, 50 years old. We replaced a boiler up in New England that was almost 70 years old. So it's about resiliency of equipment. And it's also about health. We're hearing a lot about indoor air quality. And there's a hospital that we're working with in the Pacific Northwest that has had to cancel surgeries because they haven't had within their surgery suites the right type of indoor air quality metrics to perform surgeries. That's bad for patients, and that's bad for the business of the hospital. And Amy, on the demand side, yeah, we're seeing that as really something that's going to be a coming feature. We haven't been hearing a lot from customers about rising energy demand, but we know it's coming. We know it's coming because AI, beyond the AI and data center demand increase, there's a massive jump in demand for space cooling and just electrification in general. And we've had a period for a couple decades now where it's been pretty flat or stagnant growth in energy demand. And we're now expecting that to jump 3 to 4% a year, doubling by the time we get to 2040. And that's going to be another reason, both for businesses to do it because it's going to start hitting their bill, but governments too, because they're going to need to avoid downtime on the grid and think about grid resiliency and avoid bottlenecks. And energy efficiency can be rapidly deployed for that.
I think the speed at which some of these things can be deployed is really a pivotal thing. If you got a particular location that has some kind of congestion on their grid, or even countries that have experienced severe fuel shortages in 2022, also, have that front of mind. And then just competitiveness. If you the less energy you're using to produce a product, the more cheaply you're producing it, basically. And so, I'm seeing that as being a big driver everywhere, especially as we go into this competitive landscape with new AI and so forth. And, Ed and I have been debating this, but I mean, I did a piece recently in the Wall Street Journal. The numbers that you can crank out of AI for efficiency across a wide number of sectors, whether that's transportation, building sector, building materials sector, et cetera, is very high. And it's higher than even the highest projections for how much electricity we're going to need from the AI. So there is this new course that people can take because the AI can actually help them with energy efficiency, can have them know when their equipment is going to fail before it fails, and all kinds of applications like that. So I think it should be energy efficiency enabling. But not everybody says that, but I really believe in that.
Yeah, and I think as Ed was talking about too, it even goes broader where I think AI and collecting data on indoor air quality and through other sensors and then analyzing those patterns and trends is going to result in more sustainable and efficient cooling systems, better air circulation that's done just automatically. I think there's a lot of upside there too that often gets lost in the demand growth side of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I hear all of that, and I agree that when you put it like that, it does all sound very compelling. I have to say, I have a couple of big reservations about the debate around energy efficiency, and in particular, when you think about this goal, the goal that you say you're supporting of accelerating the pace in energy efficiency improvements, doubling that from 2% a year to 4%. One of the things I think about that is that seems to be really hard to do. That if you look at the long run trend over the course of decades, that efficiency improvement has been running at about 2% a year, on and on and on, year after year after year, occasionally a little bit faster when energy prices spike and occasionally a little bit slower when energy prices decline. But on the whole, there seem to be some pretty built-in structural reasons why that's about the pace of improvement that we can expect in energy efficiency. And obviously, companies like yours and others can do great things at particular sites and generate real improvements. But across the economy as a whole, that doesn't seem to be possible to transform things. And so that makes me think, when you hear this international commitment and the big talk about doubling the pace of gains across the global economy, is that really realistic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, and I'll give you a few different perspectives. One, and I'll give just a U.S. focused example. If you go into an average large commercial industrial building in the U.S., I can almost guarantee you that there is 30 to 40% of the energy use that can be saved. So I think we're almost sitting on this just reserve of an energy resource that businesses, schools, hospitals in the US and across the globe are not tapping into. And, why isn't that happening? I think it's not happening for a variety of reasons. The one that I spend a lot of time thinking about is the way that people are thinking about the investment decisions in energy efficiency. And to be blunt, they're flat out making the wrong economic decision day after day. Businesses will look at an energy efficiency upgrade. First off, they'll only think about the utility bill savings, which is a piece of the puzzle, but it doesn't get into the operational expenses, avoided, operation and maintenance. It doesn't get into the fact of, okay, what's your opportunity cost if this chiller that you're operating that's 40 years old fails and your business goes down and you lose that revenue? And what are the added emergency repair costs? If that economic, full picture is looked at on a holistic basis, these investments are slam dunks and they're just sitting there. So, yes, there's been a good clip of efficiency improvements, but I think some of that is technology improvements, but it's not getting at the rational or irrational investment decisions that are happening day after day in country after country as it relates to energy efficiency. So I think it's just a massive potential. And as Amy was saying, is one that we can deploy quickly. And you think about, 4-year wait for gas turbines right now. What are we going to do in the next 4 years in the US? It really needs to be massive energy efficiency, deploy solar and storage. I'm a believer in the all of the above for energy, but we have the next 4 years to think about here, and there's an energy transition that needs to be made.
Ed, in some countries, energy intensity has really dropped. Like, take China, of course, is always the example everybody uses, but it's true because they've had to modernize a lot of their industry across the entire economy. And now, of course, they're exporting a lot of equipment. So you would think almost by fiat, we might get more energy efficiency with some of those products, coming to market more and more. And then, I mean, we're moving to all these things like robotics in manufacturing and so on and so forth. And one would assume that done correctly, that could be optimized in a way that actually lowers energy use and not just, oh, I'm throwing some more things I'm plugging in. And so therefore, it's all going up, up, up. It takes some sort of thoughtful planning, whether or not you're going to upgrade your equipment at what moment in time and with what kind of resource.
Right. I mean, it still doesn't sound like something that is particularly susceptible to being influenced by governments. I wonder, is there more that governments could be doing to drive this acceleration? As you say, it's a lot of individual business investment decisions being taken by businesses and nonprofits and other organizations right the way around the world. Hard to wave a magic wand to make that happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do think there's a lot of elements where there's a private sector decision to make, but some of that varies by country. There's the US, and then of course I think it's different in more emerging markets. I do think, I mentioned the holistic view of the investment decision for energy efficiency by businesses. I think governments, and I'll even take it to utilities, and in the US, independent system operators can take the same view on what is the benefit of energy efficiency in terms of removing regional grid constraints. And I think there can be paying for energy efficiency that's delivered in the right way. And you see this in some markets like PJM and ISO New England, where there's demand response, which is, let's call it a cousin of energy efficiency. There's payments for energy efficiency itself, and that matters. And I'll go to one example of a project that Metrus did in Connecticut for a community hospital, where that project was a $4 million project, and it was in an area where there were real grid constraints, and the utility Eversource was having problems at that point in time, and concerns about the grid. We got $1 million incentive from Eversource that was partially about energy efficiency, but it was really just a smart economic decision that Eversource made to get projects done. So I think you could extrapolate that, Ed, to the policy level as well. So there's a private sector role, but there's more the governments and utilities could do as well.
Hey, Ed, also, you're Bob's sitting in Brazil, a country that's talking about putting in carbon pricing or carbon taxing for heavy industry. If you're going to have to account for your emissions in the industrial sector, which a lot of countries are starting to move to because of the CBAM from Europe and other kinds of policies coming in many places, Japan and elsewhere, that encourages energy efficiency because you want to use less energy because energy is the biggest contributor to the emissions of running an industrial enterprise. So, I do think there's things that governments can do. California is, they're at the COP. I mean, they have a lot of programs that are directed at energy efficiency and emissions incentives or emissions reductions through the carbon pricing mechanism.
And I was on a panel last night with the California Public Utility Commission commissioner. And in California, there's a loading order where energy efficiency is the first thing that utilities have to think of as they're making their integrated resource plans to think about how to meet demand. And, Ed, I would put that in the same bucket of things that utilities and other governments could think on as well.
What about the other issue then? My favorite subject, the Jevons Paradox or the Jevons effect. This idea that as energy efficiency improves, essentially what that's saying is the productivity of your energy use is going up. And as a result, you can actually end up using more energy, not less, because you're doing more with that energy. This is, as it goes back to William Jevons in the 19th century, it was absolutely an observable phenomenon with coal. And coal use, of course, soared through the 19th century and has continued to rise in the 20th century and into the 21st as people were able to do more with it. It's not necessarily something that happens always and everywhere, but is a real issue, isn't it? That it is quite possible to actually improve energy efficiency and end up using more energy as a result.
I'm going to argue against that, Ed, which the listeners always like when we disagree. But first, Bob, I think you have like a firsthand story about the Jevons Paradox. So why don't you go first?
Yeah, well, maybe it's firsthand, secondhand, but it kind of just goes to show a little bit of the atmosphere at COP, which is so fun. But the COP meetings run 6 days a week, and then there's a day off. And so on the day off, we went over to the TED Countdown House that was having a book reading, and Stanley Robinson. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the book, The Ministry of the Future.
Oh, yes.
I am
Yeah,
very,
Kim
very
Stanley Robinson.
familiar.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've seen him talk. He's wonderful.
Yeah, no, it's hands down the best book on climate that I've ever read. I mean, I read it about 4 or 5 months ago and just stopped me in my tracks. Just the topics that are covered. And his book talks about the Jevons Paradox, and his book is set roughly. It starts around right now, and then it goes out about 30 or 40 years, and it gets intertwined with the COP process. But he talks about it, and his main point is that you really need policy interventions to help counter that. So areas that, maybe it gets into a carbon tax, that could be one example, but that there's a role of policymakers and interventions that need to be deployed to help solve this. I generally agree with that, but I'm also of the view that I don't know if this is our biggest concern right now. And it maybe gets back to our earlier conversation where, on a couple points, actually, energy prices. We're at a time now where we're going to start to see in some parts of the US double-digit energy prices. That is going to at least stall the Jevons effect, for sure. The prices are going up. And then I'll go back to the buildings and the customers that we work with, that we go into a facility and they're not saving all the energy they can. They're 30, 40% inefficient. So I hope we get to the point, Ed, that this is going to be a problem, but I think we got a lag and we got a lot of work to do. And, would love Metrus to be part of it, but it's an interesting discussion.
Well, and Ed, let me just say there's a really big difference between the coal industry in 1865 and what's happening today. I got it. Everybody's talking about how with this electricity thing, global coals rose 1.5% in 2024. But actually, it's been down in China and India this year. And the expectation from International Energy Agency, anyway, is that it's going to be flat this year, right? And maybe we might see at some point peak coal in the IEA's view, who knows? But I think really more to the point, in these markets where we've suddenly seen a robust response to energy efficiency, such as efficiency and fuel economy, take the United States market. Vehicle miles traveled has gone up in the United States. Gasoline demand has been going down, down, down since 2019. I get it. COVID gave a little momentum, but still to this day, we're still seeing it. Gasoline prices didn't necessarily go down, even though demand went down because of the peculiarities of the oil industry and the peculiarities of the geopolitics of oil and some other factors. So there isn't necessarily even a one-to-one that we can start using a lot less of something and the price actually goes down, even for coal, because it's a mined commodity. And so there's not necessarily this instantaneous effect. One of the interesting statistics for wasted fuel in the United States, right? There's some giant amount of gasoline and diesel fuel gets wasted every year just from people sitting in congestion. And that interested me because, of course, the AI is, making steady improvements in that. And Texas A&M tracks that, and unfortunately, their last set of data was 2022. But I think I have a better interpretation of their data than they did. What they found was that traffic from automobile commuters was still way down in 2022. and that there was a little more traffic on Saturdays than there had been in the past, which probably gets the remote working, right? People can run out and do their errands on Saturday, or I don't know why that would make people do more driving on Saturday, but maybe they feel more relaxed. They don't have to rest on Saturday, who knows? But the interesting thing was that congestion for trucks was up a bit. Of course, they say because of e-commerce, but that will eventually get eased because the programs for optimizing e-commerce is not just that the trucks are going to use better routing, because that's already happening, since 2022, market improvements in that. But just all this spying on us through our data means that these companies know what we're going to buy and what week. They have that stuff positioned in distribution centers. They have closer in distribution systems, and all of that saves fuel. And so I think as we move in the AI and this, even with all this e-commerce, UC Davis has done some studies that show that maybe you and I driving to the mall is less fuel efficient than Amazon using the algorithm to bring us those same goods. I really believe in the AI in terms of its high potential. And then when you come to the building sector, there's this new interest in geothermal as a building technique, even for retrofitting older buildings. And, there's one building I know of, a new building in New York City, that really tapped the geothermal potential. And they say that they saved 80% of the electricity they need from the grid by having this system that attaches water flowing through underground for heating and cooling systems and connecting to a rooftop HVAC. So, I mean, the savings could be really dramatic. And as Bob says, if in other places we kind of move forward with a positive policy framework, but even in a place like Manhattan, of course, they have that law, which they've now backtracking from, to electrify buildings. But I mean, the technologies are coming.
Amy, just jumping in. So you're in Manhattan. One of my favorite things, and I see it every time I go to New York City, is the energy efficiency grades that are on the buildings, where they have the A, B, C, D, and it's super interesting because you go into a building that you're feeling is a marquee building, and you're like, oh, they're a C. What's going on there? And I love that.
Yeah, I agree. It is really interesting. I like walking up and down our block, and buildings that can look identical from the outside can have completely different, one can be an A, one can be a D, and it's not at all obvious just to look at them. And as you say, kind of intriguing to think what is going on there. So look, Bob, I know you've got to go and be on a panel. We should let you go very quickly. Just before we do, just interested in hearing your kind of final thoughts on COP30. How has it left you feeling about the global effort on climate change and the energy transition? Where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how it has me, feeling energized and optimistic, and I really felt that way at all the different COPs that I've been at, and I think part of that is one, it's a nonstop learning environment, which is just so fun to be part of, and I think it also is because you realize, and I day in, day out focused on energy efficiency and sustainable energy upgrades within my narrow world. And that's just one node. There's so many different nodes where people are doing the day-to-day hard work and getting projects done, whether that's in renewable energy. Amy was mentioning transportation. There's AI, other fronts, broader biodiversity issues. And just being part of that is uplifting, but it also has a real practical learning value that, I value as an individual, but I get to bring back to my colleagues at Metrus and, help make our business better. And in terms of some of the outcomes, what I'm really focused on is I see a lot more connectivity between the private sector and subnationals. So I think we're entering an era of bottom up, projects getting done from the bottom up, and not so much the top-down federal world. That's certainly specific for the U.S., but I see a lot of those connections being made. Like one interesting connection is energy efficiency and renewable energy. There's a lot of renewable energy folks. The Global Renewable Energy Alliance is very much involved with the doubling of energy efficiency goal. Why? Because they know that to get the renewable energy that they want to supply and generate, they're going to need energy efficiency to help reduce grid constraints. And that's going to be a critical part of it. So you see those connections. And then I also think there's going to be a much stronger connection between energy and health. There's a lot of activity looking at cooling as a fundamental right and something that buildings need to provide. So you go and you move into a building, you want to make sure there's water, you want to make sure there's electricity, you want to make sure there's cooling. And that for me, I'm starting to see as a first. And, I feel that has meaning.
Yeah, that is really fascinating, and certainly something I think we might want to follow up on in the future in terms of, in a warming world, what are going to be the changing needs that people have, and that need for cooling is clearly going to be very important. Unfortunately, we do have to leave it there, but many thanks, Bob. It's been great talking to you. I hope the rest of COP30 goes well for you.
No, thank you, and this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you including me.
Hello, Ed here. If you like Energy Gang and you want to go deep into the world of climate solutions, I have a recommendation for you. Zero is a podcast about tech, tactics and big ideas on climate and energy. It's hosted by our friend Akshat Rathi, who you may remember from the show in the past. He's a senior climate reporter at Bloomberg Green. You'll hear conversations with world leaders such as Mia Motley, billionaire green tech investors, including Vinod Khosla, and CEOs of ExxonMobil, Uber, Siemens Energy, and many plucky climate startups as well, all grappling with the ups and downs of the energy transition. New episodes drop every Thursday. Search for Zero from Bloomberg wherever you get your podcasts.
When I first started doing this and I would talk about climate change, it was like another subject like geology, hydrology, meteorology, and it was well received. And then at some point it got politicized.
What made climate change political was the most comprehensive, longest-running propaganda campaign in U.S. history. I'm Amy Westervelt, the host of Drilled, a true crime podcast about climate change. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, one of the other big issues that's being discussed at COP30 is methane. Methane, of course, is the principal constituent of natural gas, and it's also a very potent greenhouse gas. And cutting methane leakage from the oil and gas industry can be one of the most effective ways to cut emissions quickly. To talk about that, we're joined by Bjorn Otto Sverdrup, who is the chair of the executive committee of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which is a group of 12 leading companies in the industry, and he's also head of another larger group, the Secretariat for the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter. Bjorn Otto has just been in Belem and has just returned, I think, this morning. Hi, Bjorn Otto, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Bon dia, as you would say.
Indeed, welcome to the show. Interested then in hearing about what you've been doing at COP30. Why did you go?
This year we were actually invited by the COP30 presidency, the president himself, Ambassador Dolago, to be a partner in organizing the Energy Day, because they, of course, come to this that energy is an important part of any climate discussions. I think they were inspired by the work that we've done in OGCI, and also later this larger charter, as you mentioned, the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter, to drive collaboration, be action-oriented, and to try to implement the pledges of climate action. And as you would know, OGCI is organizing 12 of the largest oil and gas companies in the world, have been doing that for more than 10 years, with the aim to be a catalyst for change and to drive decarbonization in this important industry. And we have delivered strong results. And I think they wanted to hear about that, to challenge us, to look at the gaps, but also to see how could we amplify the progress made to a bigger group.
And as you say, this bigger group then, the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter, that came out of the COP28 in Dubai 2 years ago, didn't it? Tell us about that body then. What are its goals?
The OGDC, I think in a short period of time, has perhaps become one of the most important industry platforms across any industry working on decarbonization. It brings together 55 companies, all of them some of the largest companies in the countries, with activities in more than 100 countries, these companies, covering nearly 40% of the world's daily oil and gas production. So there are more than 6,700 fields. And what unites these companies is that their CEO and the chairman of the board have shared some ambitions. One of them is to get to near zero methane emissions by 2030, including to achieve zero routine flaring by 2030. We also included in this charter that you should set interim ambitions, articulate action plans, and report progress. And the important part is collaboration, which is at the heart of this initiative, to collaborate to share among that. So de facto, this charter has become a very important platform for sharing of practices between international oil and gas companies, with state-owned companies and national oil companies, because 2/3 of the signatories are national oil companies, which typically hasn't been part of any of the initiatives for this industry earlier.
Right, and that's what you were doing at COP30, wasn't it? As you say, was reporting on progress. What progress have you been able to show?
Yeah, as you know, this COP wasn't about, they didn't really encourage new pledges or new ambitions. The main concern was, we're in the action mode. What is happening? Are you able to live up to your promises? What kind of implementation is happening? Can we accelerate actions? And I think here OGCI, launched 10 years ago, actually been able to deliver strong progress. So methane emissions are down 62%, flaring is down 72%, and overall greenhouse gas emissions from that group of companies are down around 24%. So it's a very strong performance. The charter, of course, the OGDC, is only 20 months or 2 years. So how we're measuring progress there needs to be somewhat different. So we're measuring progress on OGDC along 2 dimensions. One is, are they making progress on, do more companies report? Do companies articulate ambition plans? Are they underpinning those with action plans? And are they participating and sharing and learning and building capacity to improve? And then, of course, it takes time to bend the curve, but we are also looking at actual emissions reductions, right? This year we put, at the COP, we launched the second progress report because we aim to share updated status every year. So when we launched this report, we see notable progress actually. More companies are reporting. Today, 98% of the production from these companies are covered by reports. And we also noted that 30 companies are sharing data with us that are typically not sharing data or releasing public data. More companies are setting ambitions. And I think 12 companies have this year set and developed action plans on methane emissions reductions that they didn't do last year. I believe the charter itself has been an impetus for change. More than 2,000 engineers have been trained through this program. We have done more than 18 tailor-made trainings on the ground, training individual companies to both understand their emissions, but also to learn how to mitigate those actions. One novel thing this year was that in the status report, all of the companies are reporting their emissions on a uniform reporting framework. That may sound like a trivial thing, but in order to be able to compare and aggregate numbers, we need to be able to distinguish not only different types of apples and pears, but also in this space, I think you some have oranges and some have incomplete counting of numbers. So striving to have a uniform reporting is very, very important.
I have to say, having looked into that question of emissions reporting a little bit, that doesn't sound like a trivial thing at all. As you say, that is clearly a big challenge and actually a real step forward if you are able to put that on a consistent basis.
And also, Ed, we should say we're making this a journey, right? Ideally, we would like to have all companies fully understanding their emissions, perfectly reporting them in the same standardized format and driving action. But that's not the world we're in.
Hey, Bjorn, how does the effort, this year at Belem, you have a lot of important government representatives and commentators saying that there needs to be a stronger initiative, global initiative on methane. How does your group help that along, or did you intersect on that at all at Belem? How are you seeing that progress?
It's a great question, and I think it's very important to address the topic of methane. I think we engage in discussions around that on multiple fronts. First, I think Ambassador Dulago, the COP president himself, actually embraced the pragmatic nature, showed this important signal and say, look, if we're going to be able to fix methane, this industry needs to be part of the discussion. Very important. The World Bank was also part of our discussions, and they said it seems that this peer-to-peer industry-wide collaboration is actually working and they're able to deliver results. That was, to me, encouraging. NGOs and others also also doing the same. I sense that there is more of a shared view that methane, particularly from oil and gas, seems to be something that is doable. We have the willingness to act upon it. We know how it can be solved. And for the first time ever, we kind of created a platform for that action. So there was quite a lot of promise, actually, and optimism that instead of inventing new solutions, why don't we try to make some of these things work, and particularly pointing to the lessons from OGCI and how we can use that in the broader framework with OGDC.
Right, because I mentioned earlier this global methane status report, which is something that came out of the UN. And at the highest level, the message from that essentially was, yes, progress is being made on reducing methane emissions, but that progress is not fast enough to hit the goals that have been set for cutting emissions by 2030. When you think about the oil and gas industry worldwide, do you think the momentum is still there? I mean, as you say, there has been a lot that's been achieved already. Arguably, perhaps a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been picked now. It can get harder to reduce emissions as you go on, as you drive them down to these very low levels. And as you say, you're also looking at a much wider group now beyond those big international oil and gas companies that have been the kind of the core of this effort in the OGCI. Do you think a lot more will be done?
It's a big question, but just remind us of the price here. So methane emissions from the oil and gas industry is estimated to account for nearly more than 2 billion tons of CO2 emissions. That's equal to 2/3 of all cars in the world, 2/3 of all cars in the world, or twice as much as all the emissions from all airplanes in the world. So it's a very, very big part. I think that for the first time, we now have a recognition that this is a true challenge, and it's an invisible and odorless gas. There is a recognition that this needs to be addressed. And also through OGCI and the OGDC, you see there is a willingness among the leading companies to address this. 2 weeks ago, we gathered in Abu Dhabi, 35 CEOs were there, and all of them signaled and reiterated to support to the ambition of getting to near zero methane emissions. This moment is that we have the readiness, the willingness, and also the ability and the technology to address this. And I'm not sensing actually that there is a slowing down of the momentum. Rather, there is a continuation of momentum, but it will rely on continued focus. It will rely on continued leadership. And also, probably, it will rely on governments and NGOs and also the financial community being willing to particularly lend out a helping hand to the emerging economies. Because let's be real, the methane intensity is the highest in some of the emerging economies. And with the most recent reports from IEA and others coming out saying that oil and gas will be around, it represents 55% of the world's energy system today. It would be around probably for longer than many would like. So in many ways, I think it has become more important to produce responsibly, and it's become more important to address methane.
And Bjorn, how does that interact? We're having a lot of discussion, outside of Belem and other kinds of forums about the growth in the LNG business. And LNG has typically been a methane intensive business. And so how do you see, is there a division between, gas NOCs and oil NOCs in your efforts, or how are you seeing the LNG industry from that perspective?
Methane is typically natural gas, right? It's the main product of natural gas.
Right.
So I think people are coming to the discussion, Amy, from different views, but all of them are rooting it in a very solid business case.
Of course.
So some are thinking of this as a climate action. This is something that you need to do. Others are looking to this to say, I'm going to address methane because this is what I think is responsible operations. I need to contain my product. This is, it's not so much about environment, but it's more, there's a responsibility you have if you're producing natural gas, including LNG. And then again, if you're traveling in the developing world, I would say, look, we're an energy-starved country. We have no energy to lose. And methane leaks is an energy loss. On the margin, I have to import all this through expensive LNG. We're going to fight all those crack in pipelines. We're going to, make sure that our valves are not leaking. We're just hold back all that leakage. So, and others again are saying, look, this is about protecting the long-term value of our product, ensuring the attractiveness of natural gas in the energy mix. I see plenty of different kind of rationales for addressing methane, including that of regulations, but I sense there is a strong drive in the voluntary impact. No real big difference between LNG producers or in the upstream oil and gas.
Well, I think, the other thing is there's opportunities. You have the controversial IMO carbon tax, which is delayed by a year. But there's a whole question about, LNG as a shipping fuel for marine and, what's its life cycle analysis and how much of an improvement could it be? And methane slip is a big part of that as well. So a lot at stake.
Couldn't agree more, Amy. And there's the scale of this opportunity, the 2 giga. There's not that many gigaton opportunities out there, right, to reduce emissions. So the OGCI members, the 12, represent around 26% of the world's oil and gas production. But the share of methane is probably around 2% because they've been able to bring those emissions down in a very short period of time. And I think it's the combination of scale, the proof point that it is possible to reduce it, and also now the willingness of the broader industry to engage with so many leading companies. To me, it's a bit of, I choose to be quite optimistic around this, that it is possible to make a big inroad into reducing methane emissions over the next 60 months, because the 60 months is what we have until 2030.
And what do you think in terms of, has the fact that we now have satellite technology where independent groups can, I know California just released, one of the California universities just released a study from satellites. Is that putting extra pressure on the pace and the speed, sort of coming down the road? Is there AI improvements that make it easier to do it faster? Give us a little perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, methane is a immiscible gas. You cannot smell it. And it's been a gas maybe many didn't have on the top of their mind in discussions. And also, I think even you need to say the industry has designed equipment that only would work with methane leaks, such as flaring or pneumatic valves where you have bleed off of natural gas. The world is so different now, because you can see it, as you said, through satellites, airplanes, drones. We ourselves have invested heavily to help develop those technologies and deployed large-scale satellite campaigns also in emerging economies. And it's amazing what you can do with the satellite pictures and AI to basically recreate a plume. And what we have been doing is to take that sophisticated technology into remote areas, be that in Algeria, Egypt, Kazakhstan most recently, knocking on the door and saying, hey, have you seen these pictures from your site? Are you willing to fix it, or are you able to fix it? The amazing thing that when you have those data, many companies are unaware and confronted with the data. They welcome the view, and they're able to mitigate those emissions in a fairly short period of time. Why? I come to believe that many plant managers would like to run a well-run plant, and it's a safety risk, and often it's fairly quick fix. It could be a flare that's normally is there for safety, that is not lit, blowing leaks out. There is a valve that's open that you're unaware of. These sounds like trivial things, but unfortunately it's still happening in many places.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point about advances in technology and how they are making it possible to cut emissions in all kinds of new ways, and are going to be clearly a very important part of the solution. Looking for greater resilience in energy systems without the risks of going it alone? At Hythium, we've got you covered. As an integrated energy storage solution provider, we offer customized storage systems as a service, tailored to each project, whether utility scale, commercial, or renewable integration. From design and financing to operations and maintenance, Hythium manages the entire life cycle, delivering sustainable profit, stronger resilience, and lower emissions. Built to last, built for progress. Discover more at www.hythium.com, and let's empower the green future together. LNG 2026 is the premier global conference and exhibition for the LNG industry, taking place in Doha, Qatar on the 2nd to the 5th of February 2026. Under the theme Leading LNG, Powering Today and Tomorrow, the executive programme will feature plenary and spotlight sessions with global industry leaders discussing key LNG sector opportunities and strategic topics from across the industry's value chain. The event will highlight how LNG can meet growing demand for energy, drive economic development, and enable a lower carbon future. It'll also explore issues including the impact of AI, changing ESG regulations, emerging low-carbon fuels including hydrogen and ammonia, and ways to cut methane emissions. To understand where the industry is heading, LNG 2026 is the place to be. By attending, you can join the conversation, network with global leaders, explore the exhibition floor, and experience Doha firsthand. Register for a delegate pass at lng2026.com. So unfortunately we have to leave it there, but many thanks, Bjorn Otto. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Many thanks to you, Amy.
Ed, great to be here.
Thanks again to Bob Hinkle. It's been great talking to you all. Thanks to our producers, Stuart Duffy, Toby Biggins-Gilchrist and Dan Cottrell. And above all, many thanks to all of you for listening. We really do value your feedback, so please keep that coming. And we'll be back soon when we'll be rounding up the outcomes from COP30 and weighing up what the talks might mean for the future of energy. Until then, goodbye.